Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum, which organized today's event, and I'd like to welcome Ira Rosen to our program. This is one of our many online programs. We've done over 300 since the virus shut us down almost exactly a year ago now. So this is actually the last one of the first year of shutdown. And Ira is coming to us directly from Savannah, Georgia. Where are you at? You're at a bookstore in Savannah, Georgia, right?
Yeah, I'm at a great bookstore called The Book Lady. But they don't have my book, but they'll have it after today.
It's brand new. So first of all, the first thing that I thought when I finished reading your book was the usual 6 degrees of separation between me and thousands of very famous people in politics and entertainment and media. We're all going to be collapsed down to 1 degree of separation. That is, you're my 1 degree of separation. Second thing I thought was I better work really hard to keep that 1 degree of separation, because most of these people don't seem to be that good of company, but pleasant company. I mean, it's very fascinating, except for a few mafia dons, which you found charming. and so I was sort of curious, your experience with so many different types of people, what is it that you think drives these people to be less than pleasant? I mean, you told a lot of great stories of the people that you really liked working with and stuff like that, but sure. What is it overall that you think makes people drive, themselves into that corner?
It's the pressure to win and the fear of failure. And, I saw this with everybody from Mike Wallace to Joe Bonanno, the head of organized crime in New York for a period of time. I saw it with, John Gotti. I saw it with Andrei Sakharov. When I was with him in Moscow. So it's really that simple. And people respond to pressure in different ways. And the fear that it's the greater fear of failure. It's the greater fear that something is going to cause them to look bad. That's really what it's about.
I think that's a great answer, first of all. And I'm glad you brought Andrei Sakharov into it. And I love the way you pulled him into that program and how that made the program work. I love it if you told that story. That's a great one.
Oh, yeah. No. I was doing a profile of Edward Teller, who was the creator of the H-bomb. In fact, he used to be stationed at the Hoover Institute out where you guys are. And Teller insisted he wrote a book at the time, and he only wanted us to ask questions from his book. And I told Mike Wallace, this is going to go bad. He wants to start, as I said, on page 33, and he recited the title of his book. He said, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. So as part of it, to try to make it seem a little bit better, he had a great admiration for Andrei Sakharov, who, as you know, created the H-bomb for the Russians. And so I went to Moscow. I mean, this shows you a little bit about how we had, if you will, a kind of an open expense account. So I went to Moscow and met up with Sakharov. And it was really a remarkable moment in time, because Sakharov had won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Russians were leaving him alone. So he had a gathering of dissidents in his office, in his home. Elena Bonner was his wife. And I remember going there, and it's like the world's greatest coffee klatch. All these people who want to change society and are all there and have been through extraordinary hardships and telling great stories. And we picked Dr. Sakharov up, and Elena Bonner put a finger at me and said, "You make sure you bring him back by 3:00. And that's all Mike Wallace had to hear, because Mike is a contrarian. And if you tell him bring him back at 3, you could be sure he's going to bring him back at 4. And sure enough, that's kind of what happened. But we did an interview with Dr. Sakharov where he said that the way the Russians figured out how to build the H-bomb was to go into the snows of Siberia and after a U.S. nuclear test and gather the fallout from the U.S. tests. And they would kind of go in the snow and then deconstruct what they found. And then they could figure out, the components of the bomb, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
It was fascinating, in fact, that the CBS translator didn't want to translate it at the time because he thought that, he's revealing some state secrets. So Sakharov actually delivered that answer in kind of a broken English. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we bring him back, and Mike and him are having a good time, and we bring him back at like 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And sure enough, Elena Bonner had locked him out of the house. And he's sitting out on this stoop, in a very cold, wintry day in Moscow. And I said, Mike, we can't leave Dr. Sakharov. He said, no, he's fine. He's fine. He's all right. And so, that was the last we ever saw of him and stuff. But it was remarkable to spend a little time with him. He diminished the Rosenbergs in the sense that he said they really didn't contribute very much to help us build the bombs.
Yeah, it was so fascinating how they can, pick up. I'm fascinated by scientists who can do this in any different way, but to just skim the fallout off the top of the snow and then figure out how the H-bomb was constructed, re-engineering, reverse engineering it.
Exactly.
It's just a pretty impressive skill. So I love that story. Now let's go back a little bit to your start. One of the things that you got started at Cornell as a writer for the paper, and you did an expose on some coaches. I thought that was a great way to get started.
Yeah, my friends were telling me that I said, you guys must eat well on the road, and they said, what are you talking about? We go to McDonald's. I said, you go to McDonald's pregame? Yeah. And so I went to the school's bursar's office and got the accounting of what they did. And there was a sheet of paper. Each one of these players received $55 in cash for meals. And so I showed it to the players. They said, $55, we received $12. Yeah. So I then tracked it to each one of the players. And the longer story is that it turned out they were using the money to pay for incoming recruits' application fees. And that became my first kind of big story. And it helped me get a job with Jack Anderson, who was a kind of a muckraking columnist in Washington at the time. And when I met with Anderson, I actually met with his deputy first, Les Switten. Mm-hmm. And Les had me sit there, and he's like opening up a letter, and he says, oh man, this is I get these mail. He said, oh my God, it's a letter bomb. And he took it and he threw it right at me, and it landed on my lap. And I didn't know what to do. And it turned out it was a gag with Jack. And he picked up the phone and he said, hey, the kid fell for the old letter bomb trick. I think he just wet his pants. And it was kind of this period of time where people would wander in off the streets. And one of them was somebody who said that the CIA had planted a bug in his body. And so what Les did was he bent a metal iron so it was a long strand attaches to the back of the guy's pants. Mm-hmm. So it dragged on the floor. And he said, here, this short circuits them. It really messes them up bad. And so the guy wanders off. I always wondered what happened to him, but he kind of wandered off down the streets. And it was in the middle of Watergate. So it was an extraordinary time to be an investigative reporter in Washington. And I was inspired by these guys. And part of me never wanted to be like them because I never thought I could be like them. Mm-hmm. I mean, Cy Hirsch and Jack Anderson. I mean, I got friendly with Cy, and he would stand up outside people's homes when they left in the morning, and then he'd be waiting outside their homes when they got back in the evening. Mm-hmm. I mean, talk about a dogged reporter. I mean, he would just constantly be chasing these people down. And I loved him. I loved it. I loved that kind of zest. And it really helped me kind of energize me to do the work.
The first thing you said about when we first started talking about why people do this is the insecurity and the fear of failure. Do you think that that's why people are willing to tell their stories to the media? You have a very interesting story about, once you were an executive producer at 60 Minutes, that you could go to almost any senator and get their time because They wanted that time. They wanted that media time. So
right. I was never executive producer. I was a producer, but what you're 100% right, because what it was is people thought they could outsmart you.
yeah,
People thought, one, they could either outsmart you, outcharm you, or out-finesse you.
Mhm.
And what I learned from Mike Wallace is he built up an air of confidentiality with a person, where it's like, he used to say, okay, between you and me
yeah.
and 12 million viewers. Kind of left that part of it out, right? But he built this air of confidentiality with a person, and where they got kind of sucked into it. And Mike taught me that you always want to ask the hardest question first. So that way the guy or the woman breathes easy, relaxes. And then, of course, you come back at it somewheres in the middle or the end again. You said this earlier. That kind of bothered me that you said that. People feel that they could rehabilitate their images if they've been accused of something, and they feel that they could do this on air. The people who come off best on camera are the people who are the most interesting people who you want to have a drink with or talk with. And Bob, I learned this actually from Bob Simon, who was a correspondent on our broadcast. One time I came back from Israel and I was so proud of myself. I got the director of intelligence on camera, and he looked at me and he said, "Is he a good talker?" I said, "Oh, not really. He speaks with a heavy Israeli accent." He said, "Nobody at home cares if it's a general or a colonel. They just want to know that he could talk well."
Yeah.
And I said, God, Bob is so right, because Bob always got the best talkers in Israel. He didn't care what their position was. Bob at one point was Israeli bureau chief for CBS, and he had the whole country wired. But he always found some lieutenant or colonel who was great.
Yeah, somebody who can project into the screen a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
You just, when you were talking about people always think that they can talk their way out of it, it reminded me immediately of Prince Andrew's last interview, where he just dug himself deeper into the hole.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't get why, first of all, so you would think someone like Prince Andrew gets a little media training.
Yeah.
And before doing such a significant interview like that, he would have been prepping for days but yeah, you're right. I just don't get that.
Interesting that you say that too, because that brings us, like to somebody like Nixon or some of the other big politicians who also said, "Oh, I don't need any practice before I go on. I'm a debater. I am this or that," and then really getting destroyed by what they do on screen. So, what is it that if you had to advise these all these people, because you spoke to so many politicians, so many people in the entertainment industry, and of course you worked with the guys in the media that were famous. What would you advise people who want to make it, because everybody's doing stuff online now and out of their own homes and everything? What's the crucial part of it that made it?
It's the how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Yeah. They need to try out their lines and their responses with people who they trust, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, whoever it is, and they need to see how that sounds. And you want somebody who gives you kind of honest feedback back. The main thing is the viewer has a great eye. The camera never, there was a book that Dan Rather had written, Camera Never Blinks. And that the viewer kind of understands when a person is lying and not lying.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I got fascinated with all these gangsters, because once when they decide to tell their story, they often tell the truth. Now, it's a journey to get them to go on camera. But once when they actually sit down, they talk about, some of their crimes. They talk about the commission. They talk about amazing stuff. And politicians are constantly thinking, which constituency do I not want to get angry, or which constituency am I trying to cater to? And you could see this. And I don't want to start calling out this one or that one, because frankly, they're, it's
universal.
It's universal. Exactly. It's universal. But you could actually see when you just, and these are people who I got to know, who I had a good relations with, a lot of these people. And I just said, will you just stop it and just tell me what you're thinking? Just tell me. They can't. It's like they're constantly trying to spin you. and that's sort of what, that's, whatever your politics are, one of the things that, I keep coming back to is Donald Trump got 70 million people to vote for him. And yes, a lot of them liked his policies, but a lot of people felt that he was a genuine person, that there was a genuineness to it. Whatever that genuineness was, they felt it was genuine. And this is my opinion about why he kept holding on to a lot of people. When the election was going on, I went to a few of these rallies, and people would line up for hours to get in, like he was some rock star. And then I went to Hillary Clinton's rallies, and some of them they had to sort of try to pull people off the streets to sort of get to. And I'm not saying one versus the other, and I don't want to get political here, but people saw that, and that's why he did so well on camera. They felt like, when he'd be screaming, "Get that person out of here, get him out." I mean, you would never see, Hillary Clinton or anybody. So they welcome diverse opinions on things.
Right. Well, you're in a great position. That was one of my questions for later. Sure. But I'm going to do it right now. You're in a great position to have watched the interaction between the media and politics over the years. And of course, we were both young at the time that Kennedy and Nixon did their first interview. We were 6, 7, 8 years old. But that was the start of the media and how people have evolved in their relationship back and forth between the media and the politicians. But what you're saying is very interesting, which is, it's still the genuineness of somebody to come across. And again, the training maybe of somebody like Reagan to come across. Exactly. It makes all the difference. And I assume that you assume that the future is going to be more and more of the same, that you're going to be skilled.
You're exactly right. How do you teach authenticity? How do you teach honesty? Yeah. I mean, you're obviously a student of Socrates. I mean, how do you teach truthfulness? How do you teach honesty? And
that's the old thing in Hollywood, right? And once you learn to fake sincerity, you've got it made here.
Yeah, no, right. But you know what? It's getting harder and harder to do that because I think that the people who come off as genuine, whether, it's somebody who's buying a pizza and saying, I like this pizza versus that pizza, who has, enormous number of followers. The reason some of these platforms are hitting TikTok, for example, is because, people see there's a certain realness to it. There's fun. I remember when I was doing a story on social influencers, and there was a woman who went and bought a Chewbacca mask in a store and then put it on, and she just was laughing. It became the hottest video that people passed. All it was a woman who went in, bought a Chewbacca mask, put it on her face, and had an authentic reaction to it, seeing her with this silly mask on. And the thing went viral. And she ended up getting invited to talk shows because people were so fascinated by her. It's the search for authenticity. It's the search for realness that I think people are craving and want. And that's what they see. And that's what punches through on TV.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what punches through on TV. Exactly what I was thinking. And it's what I find fascinating about this is that people have all been lying to each other for such a long period of time. And why are we interested in all the shows that you put on for 40 years? Why are we interested in those people? It's mostly everybody's saying, we all have to live life. We're all trying to figure out how other people did it because we really don't have a blueprint, right?
Right. No, it's true.
So you just kind of watch how other people do it. And so the more authenticity is, the more interest you have. And as you said, with somebody like Trump, in spite of the fact that the genuineness is not, he's like a throwback to an old king or something like that from 1,000 years ago who said, I know what I'm doing, everybody follow me, but had that confidence, go ahead, and didn't really try to polish himself in the way that, the elite that he was talking against have always been trained to polish themselves,
Right. And I did a profile of John Gotti Jr. and he has succeeded his father, who is the biggest gangster in New York's history, and he didn't want to, and he quit the mob. in order to, be with his family. And it took me 4 years to get him into the chair to do the interview.
Yeah.
But once when he sat down and did the interview, it became one of the most memorable 60 Minutes of all time. It was started off as 2 parts, then grew into an hour. And it's repeated, and it's, you could watch it on YouTube if you're interested. But there was just something real and something sincere about what he was talking about. He would follow he said he would follow his father no matter what the business was. He said, if my father was a butcher, just get me a smock. And, there was that sort of, one of my favorite things is after the piece aired, I got a call from one of the former New York City police commissioners who said, I really liked him. I said, you liked him? I'm going to put him in jail for 10 years. What do you mean you liked him? No, he came off well. He came. So I was like, I just shook my head. It's like,
yeah. Well, people talk about how rich people can get out of their crimes and so on and so forth, but people who have that capacity to be genuine in front of the court and in front of a jury also can walk away because people, again, are saying, well, if not for the grace of God, some people say, well, if not for this, I would be in those shoes too, or I would be in that situation. And so they feel for them. But people that's as they always say, the cover up is much worse than the crime that you committed, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Well, you talk about Gotti and his father became the mafia leader because he took out Castellano in front of Sparks Steakhouse. I just thought I'd throw in, one of our connections, which is I was working as a lawyer at that time in New York City, and one of our clients was going to buy Sparks Steakhouse, and we were negotiating for Sparks Steakhouse on the day that the guy got shot. That put an end to the deal because he said, what about the mafia goes there? You had no idea. So, but it was really weird to have a deal destroyed by the fact that there was a mafia hit right outside of the
that'll do
restaurant. Yeah, that'll do it. Yes.
That'll do it. Oh my God.
So now you worked on, before we get to some of the celebrities, you worked on some really important investigations that changed things. One of them was the insider trading in Congress. Why don't you tell about that? And also the epilogue, which is very disappointing about politicians, but it's part of the story. I think it's, But tell that story. I think that's great.
No, thanks for asking it. I mean, I was working with Peter Schweitzer, who's an author who'd written a few books. I think he's another Hoover Institute person. I seem to like Hoover Institute. But there was a chapter in his book that kind of caught my eye about that it's legal for congressmen and senators to trade stocks based on inside information that they've gotten from congressional hearings. Closed hearings in many cases. So they're trading stocks based on who may get a contract or who won't. One senator who we focused on shorted stocks after getting a briefing from Hank Paulson that the U.S. economy was about to crater. And the way I kind of found that little bit of business out was I looked at Hank Paulson's book. And he basically wrote it in diary form. And so he said, I briefed this senator on this time that the U.S. economy was going to crater. And then the senator posted his stock trades, but he posted the brokerage accounts. So you have time-stamped when the stock trade was. So I matched up when the meeting was with when the stock trade was, and it was within 30 minutes. Wow. And the guy and the senator cleared 30,000 or something in a short period of time in a very, 30,000, was a lot of money for 25% of what they make in a year or something at that time. And they've given themselves some raises since. And so at the time, there was a corrective legislation to make this illegal called the Stock Act, and it only had 13 sponsors. So after we did the story, it got 185 sponsors, like within a week. Senators were fighting over who's going to sponsor it in the Senate. President Obama talked about it in the State of the Union. And within 3 or 4 months, it ended up passing. And I was in the White House. I was invited in the White House to watch the signing.
Mhm.
And that was enormously satisfying. However,
However,
within a few months after, 60 Minutes leaves town and the Stock Act is passed and everybody glad hands themselves, it quietly, they rescinded through a voice vote, which basically means, there's no registered vote by any congressman or senators. They vote for it, yay, nay, that sort of thing. So they rescinded it. And then in the last go-round in the pandemic, a few senators got called out on the carpet for doing inside trading on the pandemic. So it's like business as usual.
Right.
I found over the years the corruption in Washington is breathtaking. In many ways, much worse and much with far larger impact to people than anything like the mafia may be doing in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I mean, these guys and women, I don't want to just blame the male race, but they're extraordinary. I mean, another story we did was on, which I'm incredibly proud, was on the opiate epidemic. And what Congress did is they passed legislation that neutered the powers of the DEA at the height of the opiate epidemic, that took away all their powers of enforcement abilities. And then after they passed this legislation, scores of them went to work for the opiate industry and drug industries as lobbyists, as vice presidents. So one person in particular, he actually helped craft the legislation that neutered the agency that he used to work for. And then he went to work for the drug industry. Mm-hmm. And so one of the congressmen who did this was, he didn't work for the drug industry, but Congressman Marino, his people did, but he was the architect of this legislation. And then 2 days after, he was named to be Donald Trump's new drug czar. And then we do the story. And then within 2 days of us doing the story, Trump rescinds the offer, if you will.
Right.
And takes it away. And we did that as a great collaboration with the Washington Post. And it really affected change. Those are the stories that over the years I've gotten the most satisfaction from.
Yeah. Not to mention quite a few awards, which
I've done well.
Very well. And I think maybe there's a good time to go back and tell the story about your father's childhood, because it clearly must have affected your desire to have an effect on the community in which people live, because he came from such a difficult situation.
There's really not a day or a week that goes by that I don't think about what he went through in Poland. He was in a small town on the border of Poland and Russia when the Nazis came in, and they basically told his mother secured a place for him to be hidden, basically while the Nazis were there, and basically through the war, a righteous family took him in, hid him in a haystack, and protected him for 3 years. Not even telling the story, not even telling their kids, except for their oldest daughter, that they had my father hiding upstairs. He was 16 years old at the time, but he could only hide one. And so my father's mother and his twin sisters went back to the town. And basically what the Nazis said was, for the next 48 hours, you could do anything to the Jews. Mm-hmm. And, the Jews were slaughtered all through the town, and they robbed and all sorts of things. And I often thought about that. On one hand, given permission to commit a crime without consequence, would you do that? Or given the opportunity to save another life, but it would risk putting your family at risk, would you do that? So my father faced, in that little town in Poland, it was the best of humanity and the worst of humanity coming out to play. And as I wrote in my book, Ticking Clock, at the end of the first chapter, it's like I always keep one eye open, looking out for the neighbors, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And not, it's the old Reagan line of trust but verify. And I think about that a lot, about what decision would I have the courage to take in somebody who was about to get murdered, but it would risk putting my family at risk. And the story of the righteousness of those people has been told a little bit, but not told enough. Certainly, Spielberg did a version of that in Schindler's List, but I think about that quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think it brings us right back to the big issues about the politicians and what they've done and how they speak and what they do. I thought there was a very good line that you had in the 60 Minutes show with the Carters during Reagan's administration, when Rosalind Carter said this thing about Reagan, because Reagan was somebody who himself personally was one of those charming people that especially after he got shot, using his sense of humor, that kind of thing that really worked on TV, whether you liked his policies or not. He was popular at different times. But he did do something all kinds of politicians do, which I thought, put the needle on when she made her comment. I want you to tell that story to talk to.
Yeah, no, I was doing, it was, I think the first interview after he left the White House and Mike Wallace was the correspondent, and Mike was friendly with the Reagans. Mm-hmm. And I knew this was not going to go very well. And sure enough, we're doing the interview, and I'm trying to prod him I'm trying to prod Mike to ask him, the president, about Reagan. And I said, will you ask him about human rights under Ronald Reagan? And Mike said to me, I'm not going to ask him about human rights under Ronald Reagan. I said, Mike, this man stood for human rights. Will you ask him about human rights? He said, no. I said, Mr. President, will you tell him to ask you this? And this is also a little bit about what producing is about. Yeah. And the President Carter said to me, Ira, don't get me involved in your silly little questions. I said, Mike, now you're embarrassing me. Ask him about human rights on the bottom. So he said, you want me to ask him? Okay, I'll ask him. And he does like this. He slates the camera and he says, this is how he asks the question. Human rights under Ronald Reagan. Carter almost was like a setup. So he took it and ran with it. He said, the first thing this president did was send Jeane Kirkpatrick down to snuggle up to Pinochet. And that sent a message that human rights is no longer operative in the Ronald Reagan administration. Mm-hmm. And Mike looks at his notebook, pretty good. Jimmy says to me, like that. Yeah. And I like that. Mike calls me a name. Front page New York Times the day after it appears. Yeah. So later in the day, I go up to Rosalind Carter and I say, listen, he's really friendly with Nancy Reagan. I want you to come out with your guns blazing. And she says, Ira, I'll do my best. And she sits down and says a line which you referred to, which I stayed with me, which is, this president makes us comfortable with our prejudices. Yeah. And it kind of blew me away. Yeah. And Mike didn't almost know how to react. He basically said, that's not a very nice thing to say. And she said, and it was a fantastic line. It was one of the I think one of her most quoted lines she's ever spoken. Mm-hmm. And in the car ride back to Atlanta when we were flying back home, Mike was all worried about what Nancy Reagan and Ron Reagan were going to say, because he had good relations with them. And to Mike's credit, all of it stayed in. It was a very tough piece, and we all moved forward from there. But it was a line that always stuck with me.
Yeah, it was very interesting how both of them were very media savvy on how to, especially the way Carter played the game between you and Mike Wallace. I thought that was a great part of the story, was that he played both sides in order to get his point in. It reminded me a little bit of a story I heard out here of how politicians get their way in things. It was Bill Clinton, one of the political reporters for the ABC San Francisco affiliate, and he said that, when people come to town during elections, they all line up in a hotel and there's 5 rooms and ABC, NBC, everybody's got their own room and they go from one to the other. So nobody knows anything, nobody knows anybody. But in order to get on the air, the politicians are always using your name. So every time they answer you, they say, Bob this, Bob this, Bob this, or Ira this, And the guy said, but the smartest of them all was Bill Clinton, because he only said your name once. And that was the soundbite that he wanted to go on, because he knew that increased the chances of the soundbite he wanted to get on because your name was in it.
His aide, Mandy Grunwald, actually had told him that these on-air people have such vanity. If you use their name, they'll use the bite. So he did an interview with 60 Minutes during that time, and he kept mentioning Steve Krofft's name and Steve whenever he wanted the answer to be. When he didn't want, he just left his name out.
Right. Yeah. Very, very clever. That's why I said that's the thing that put him up above the other politicians from political.
But then again, but his mistake was in revealing that. So as a producer, when he starts doing it, now you say, that's the one answer I'm not going to use.
Yeah. He told a lot of stories about how he got things done because he was so proud of it. And that kind of, I thought, shifted the way the presidency actually operated, because most presidents before that had done the same things, but never told anybody.
Right, exactly.
And he seemed, that sort of gave away his naivety about being a politician, maybe. But I thought it was very funny.
Right.
He gave it away, but still, at the same time, figured out ways to make it work better for him.
Yeah.
So there's those investigations. There's a couple other really big ones that you've done. Medicare fraud is another one. And just it reminded me, because I just read something the other day. Unemployment, with all this money being spread around by the government right now, the unemployment fraud, they said it was like $11 billion in California alone in unemployment fraud under the new money that's going out. So you tell a little bit about the Medicare fraud situation.
Well, it's remarkable how easy it was. What they used to do and we focus on Southern Florida, is they'd set up a clinic, and they would order all this material through Medicare, and they would then and Medicare would just ship it. There was no checks and balances on a lot of these things. And so the amount of money that they could make was extraordinary. What they did was they got a hold of people's Medicare numbers, for example. And one of the people we interviewed in that story was a former federal judge. And they ordered 2 prosthetic arms for him, not 1, but 2. And he said, you could see my arms are fine, but Medicare paid for it. And the cutout made a lot of money on it. I love doing stories where you just sort of say at the end of it, no, that can't be real. No, that's not real. Another one was tax refund fraud, which is sort of along the same lines. Right. They get, these scam artists get a hold of your refund checks and then have it sent to a drop mailbox. And guys said, I'd fill out 10, 20 forms, and I could make $10,000, $20,000 in the course of a day or two, and without working very hard. And the IRS just paid it. I mean, there's extraordinary amount of money that just goes out the door without checks and balances. So, everybody's trying to scrimp on stuff, but they need much more of an enforcement effort. I think that's where I came out on it, which is, Medicare at that time, before we did the story, didn't really have a strong enforcement effort to go after these people. And after we did the story, I think they gave like an extra $100 million to try to stop the fraud from going out the door.
Do you having done all those kind of investigations into the government, what is your take on something like the single payer system for national health care and letting the government take over different things? Have you developed a political philosophy about that kind of thing? Again, this is my opinion. It's not, I'm not speaking for anyone else. My opinion is the more that government involves themselves in our personal lives, the worse it is. They don't make things better through the systems that they set up. They make things worse. And I'd love to debate somebody on that in terms of what they've actually done that has been great. Now, having said that, the Great Society programs under Johnson obviously have been enormously successful, have saved lives,
have done incredible stuff. I think I think journalists in the future are going to be examining the way the pandemic and the vaccine rollout happened. And friends of mine who are in the medical community are telling me, horror story after horror story about this. It's a story that's still playing itself out. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they do it well. I think private industry and private companies have more incentives to do it right and more in a more cost efficient way.
Mm-hmm. And even
when you're getting a salary, here's the thing: when you're just getting a salary, you're going to get paid whether something works or not.
Right.
And it's not like you're incentivized because you saved the government $100 million. Mm-hmm. You're still getting the same paycheck. But that's not the way it works in private industry. Private industry, people are incentivized to improve mechanisms and to make things efficient. Not obviously. I'm speaking broadly, but generally you are credited. People get bonuses or whatever. That doesn't really happen in government. So I think that's one of the big faults and problems in that regard. I mean, there was a point in time when I know under the Trump administration, they were talking about privatizing the army, for example,
right,
and sending private armies to, Iraq or Afghanistan. That has its own set of issues and problems. Right. So you don't really want to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say that to divide the what the government does and what it doesn't between what can be monetized and what can't be monetized. Very hard to put a monetary value on education, for example, where it's absolutely crucial. And so, but we won't go into that discussion. There's too many fun stories to do. So let's back up again to you're a young man and you come out of Cornell with this one story and so on and so forth. And you're a good tennis player, which really helps. So why don't you tell the story about playing tennis with Peter Moss when you first got started and who you played with doubles out in the Hamptons? Because I think that's great.
Thank you for asking me because I got a email from the person I'm about to mention's wife. So I'm playing tennis. And Peter Moss was a writer who wrote the Valachi Papers and Serpico. And, talking about, I just admired him so much and I learned so much from him. And so he let me hang out with him in the Hamptons. And the price was I had to play tennis with him on weekends and doubles. Mm-hmm. And one day I get to the court and it's Kurt Vonnegut and Morley Safer. And it was kind of, the way I describe it in the book, it's the old man tennis, the way old man tennis is supposed to be played, with lots of banter and fun. Kurt Vonnegut's wife actually sent me an email. She loved the story so much. She passed it around, and she called Morley's wife, Jane Safer, and read it to her. But they smoked cigarettes constantly. And so, between games, they smoke a cigarette and then play a little bit and smoke another cigarette. And then they just got tired of putting the cigarette out. So then they go on the court and both of them are smoking cigarettes. And I didn't want to hit the ball at them. I was afraid they're going to choke. So I'm playing, as in Peter Moss's words, soft. And but it was so delightful and talking and relaxed. And, the tennis was just sort of a different place than a bar. It was a place to banter and talk. And it was really one of the most memorable matches I've ever played. It's because I love Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah. I mean, oh my God, he went to Cornell, as you know.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. I mean, anyway, that was such a beautiful image, and you have so many of them. And if you read the book, there's hundreds of these kind of things. But I don't want to miss the one with Marlon Brando. You're trying to get Marlon Brando on, and I love how you missed a date, which I think almost everybody would have skipped that date. But to tell that story, I think that's just wonderful.
Yeah, I know it's appropriate that I'm doing this from a bookstore because. I had just finished a story on Joe Bonanno, and I wanted to use a little bit of The Godfather. Normally, it's a very simple request through the studio. One day, Brando himself calls. How is Joe Bonanno okay with using this and all this? Yeah, he's fine. But he and I then began a long conversations over weeks and months. I'd call him up and wish him happy birthday. Both of us were born on the same date. And he said, what is it with birthdays? Animals don't celebrate birthdays. Trees don't celebrate birthdays. What's it, why are you Marlon, I'm just calling you up to wish you happy birthday. Celebrate it. And then another time he'd call me up and, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but they just start, they don't say, hello, how are you? No, they just talk. And so one day Brando calls up and he says, you ever know that people who have these great reputations, but are real? And I said, hey, Marlon, good, nice talking to you. I got to go. I'm meeting somebody at the bar. He ignores it. Charlie Chaplin, great reputation. And William Saroyan, great reputation. And so then he starts reading me Saroyan. And I'm like, oh my God, Marlon Brando is reading me. No one else, William Saroyan. And it's really magical. And this is a time before cell phones or text. You can't text. I'm running a little late. Yeah. Can't do that. And so I had the choice, listen to Brando or meet the person at the bar. And of course I picked Brando. And then, 20 minutes after he began the conversation, he hangs up and just stops. He just gets bored or whatever. He hangs up. But I wanted him as an on-camera interview. So I was pursuing him. And finally I got a time to meet him in LA with Mike Wallace. And he picks us up in a white Rolls Royce. He's wearing a white suit. Mike gets in the front. I'm sitting in the back. Mike says, I'm a little nervous. Brando says he's a little nervous. And I'm saying, yes, this is going so well. we drive down Mulholland Drive and Marlon's running every single red light. And I said, Marlon, what are you doing? You're going to get us killed. He said, you're going to let a machine tell you what to do? Be a man. We finally get to this restaurant and we sit down. And Marlon starts by saying, Mike, I've admired your acting abilities for a long time. And he said, what are you talking about? Oh, the raised eyebrow, the look of astonishment. You're a genius actor. I'm a journalist. I'm not an actor. Oh, stop it. You're an incredible actor. So, oh my God, what's going on here? And then Mike decides to hit back. So he says, how did you get so fat? And Brando says, well, I go to Baskin Robbins. I can't decide what flavor I want. So I order a quart of everything they got and I take it home. I end up eating it all. At which point Mike says, I'm 66 years old. I don't need to make my reputation by showing America what an asshole you are. Let's just be friends. And I'm like going crazy because I really wanted the interview. Anyway, Brando at that point, the calls became very, very infrequent. But I got one final call from him. And he says to me, you play the market? I said, a little bit. I don't have much money. And so he said, well, you should. Let me give you a stock tip. I said, what's that? There's a company called Apple. I said, I haven't heard of it. He said, you will. Trust me. Put all your money into it. I said, okay, fine. I tell Mike about this. And Mike says, you're going to invest in the company. I said, are you crazy? Why would I take a stock tip from a guy who can't decide what flavor ice cream he wants?
Because he got the tip direct from Steve Jobs, right?
Yes, he apparently at that time the company had gone public, I guess, a year or two before. But Jobs wanted Brando in, I think, commercials or something. So that's how he got it. And I wasn't really, I'm stupid. Just call me stupid. I just wasn't sensitized to the whole computer revolution that was about to take place at that time. I was a year late on that one.
Well, it's still very hard to look back and see who's going to make it anyway. But yeah, there's everybody that says Mark Twain didn't invest in the telephone and he invested in a typesetter, and the typesetter failed, and then the telephone obviously went crazy. So, so we have a lot of questions in, and I'm going to ask a couple of them first, and then go back to a couple of things that I want to cover before.
Sure.
Just for the audience, there's if you like some of those stories about Marlon Brando and everything, there's so many. You have so many stories about so many famous people, especially the media people who you all know that did the 60 Minutes tours. And before we get to these questions, I do want to ask you one thing. You seem to be a little nostalgic for the old-fashioned office kind of chaos that was going on. And I was wondering if you think that the kind of inhibiting rules that have come into that whole play have cut down on creativity or hurt things, or whether I know you think it's partially a good thing, but is it is it partially a bad thing too for the offices that the creativity is inhibited?
I think the most important thing inside an office framework is to feel safe and to feel respected and to feel safe, whether you're a man or a woman. Harassment sometimes goes both ways, as you know. So I think that's the most important thing. I think the crazy chaos that had existed back then was something that should have been corrected back then. They should have addressed it back then. The creativeness really had to do, when I wrote about some of this in my book, it really had to do with the fact that these people were larger than life characters. That what Mike Wallace's, what he tried to do was to try to get people angry. He tried to get a reaction out of people. And of course he went too far in a lot of cases. But there was this rivalry that existed, like, Morley Safer and Mike Wallace's offices were this far apart. Yet Mike would steal a story from Morley and they wouldn't talk for a year. By the way, it's not just men who are just fighting. I mean, I went to ABC and I was working with Diane Sawyer and Barbara Walters. They were two extraordinary talents. I mean, they're the two top best people in the business, but they had an enormous rivalry. When we did Primetime Live at the very beginning, in our debut show, Diane had booked a major figure, a major character, and Barbara would, literally hours before the broadcast was trying to steal the interview. So they had these rivalries and this energy and stuff. So I think that's what I was really referring to. It's the competition that had existed, that with the chaos and the fighting that existed. But the fighting, in some ways, and again, I'm not excusing their reprehensible behavior, which a lot of it was, but some of that fighting was creative fighting. They were sparking each other to make the best piece. And they didn't treat each other so nice during those periods in time.
Yeah. It's interesting that part of being older is true at every generation as it goes by. But people often say, we wouldn't do that now, but the humor in the 2005s, say like in The Office or something like that, was very popular. We would never do something like that now, but back then, and you think back then it was like nobody knew about this. So you have to go back to the 70s, and of course it was a very big issue with the feminist revolt, and everybody knew that it was a bad boy behavior was not acceptable in the office, and so on and so forth. It's been known for a long, long time.
Right.
So I find it very humorous when people go back 10 or 15 years and say, well, we can excuse their behavior then because nobody knew anything about this then, No,
they knew about it. They just turned, they just turned their backs on some of this behavior. They didn't address it. And, when you're talking about the some of it was there were, what I talk about sometimes is there were no grownups in the room. If Barbara was stealing a story, I was involved in one situation where Barbara was stealing something from Diane. And we went to Roone Arledge, who was president of ABC News at the time and ABC Sports. And his response back then was, well, she outsmarted you.
Whoa.
Outsmarted us. He wasn't outsmarting. It was thievery. The rules have changed. People really understand, and I think it's made for a much better work environment for men and for women and for men. It's a two-way street. You need to feel safe in the work environment. I think that's a very important thing.
Absolutely. So now let's go to a question. By the way, you're in sort of a perfect position. All you have to do is read his book and you'll know he was in a perfect position to make that comment. So we have several questions come in. One came from Mark Shaw, an author, and he said, you mentioned in your book quotes from the gangster Joe Bonanno regarding the JFK assassination. You want to tell that story? You mentioned it in two places. In one place you say it may be just mafia talk. So why don't you?
Sure. There were actually two things Joe said. We finished the interview with with Mike Wallace. He's on his way to the airport, and Joe and I are having a cognac in the back porch. And I said to Joe, I first started by saying, Joe, who killed Kennedy? Uh-huh. And he said, well, when the Kennedy assassination happened, he called down to Santos Trafficante, who was the head of the mafia in Miami, and said, what's going on? And he said, listen, Trafficante said, this is what Joe said to him, Miami and New Orleans, run by Carlos Marcello, will take the heat for it. New York is absolved. New York had 5 crime families at the time. Right. And so Joe then sent his consigliere down there and found out that they tried to kill Kennedy in Miami with Cuban exiles, but failed. And then they basically took care of the deed in Dallas. Now, and then the next thing Joe told me was, I said, Joe, growing up in New York, I was fascinated by Meyer Lansky, the Jewish gangster. And I said, was he that good with investing your money? He said, investing our money? He had the picture. I said, what picture? He had a picture, this is what Joe says, of J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director, and his number 2, Clyde Tolson, having sex with each other. We used that picture to blackmail them, to basically say there was no such thing as a mafia. And for a long time, as you know, Hoover said there was no such thing. I think it was even after Appalachia in 57 that he kept denying there was anything like an organized crime. So Bonanno said that's because he had the picture. And so the problem, as you pointed out with this sort of thing, is you can't just run to the press and say, Kennedy assassination solved, here it goes. Right. Because a lot of these guys like to talk. They like to tell stories. Another gangster who I know said that it was Johnny Roselli who was shooting from a sewer and shot Kennedy. Now, when I mentioned this to Gotti Jr., he said to me, Johnny had bad eyesight. He could never make the shot. What are you talking about? So this is the kind of banter you kind of get when you're dealing with some of these guys. It's delicious stuff. It's great, but it's not something that I would call and hold a congressional committee hearing on.
So we don't take it as the only reason why J. Edgar Hoover and Robert Kennedy didn't get along when he was Attorney General, because
exactly.
Sounds like that could be the basis. He didn't want the information out. He didn't want the mafia attacked, but it's probably not the only basis, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, again, I cover a lot of this in my book, Ticking Clock. So I just urge everybody to take a look at it. And I'm giving a very short versions of some of these stories.
Absolutely. So here's another question. Here's from Susan Pfeiffer. Having watched 60 Minutes from the beginning, I remember the expose on the auto dealer who rolled back odometers and the tobacco story. What's your favorite expose on 60 Minutes and your favorite profile?
So my favorite profile, oh boy, you're going to be surprised by what I'm about to say. My favorite story that I did, where I had the most fun, was truffle hunting in Perugia, Italy, where I was able to go out and with the dogs and hunt for truffles. And of course, me being who I am, I made it into kind of an investigative story where I found out that the Chinese were flooding the truffle market with phony truffles. And there are, a handful of truffles could cost, a black truffle could cost, $1,000. White truffles are much more expensive. The Chinese figured out they had a cheaper version, a knockoff version of the truffle that they were selling for $20 a pound. So they then started flooding the market and, cheating the customer, if you will, out of it. It was just a delightful, fun story, in the hills of Italy with dogs hunting for truffles, and then having a Italian chef sing "O Sole Mio" to me while he's, grating truffles on it. Leslie Stoll and I did that story, and both of us, regard it as one of our all-time favorites.
Yeah, and you wrote up that story really nicely in the book.
Yeah, and I have pictures from that shoot.
Yeah, exactly. You just an aside, you say the most expensive show ever done was never put on. It was about the Tibetan monks.
Oh my God!
Yeah, that was just such a funny side story.
Yeah, Ed Bradley. I'm not sure what language I could use, but on this Zoom. Well, I'll clean it up a little bit, not to offend anybody. But Ed Bradley did a story with his producer Bill McClure, and they went to Tibet, and the producer was a former cameraman, and he kept shooting sunrise and sunsets, and became one of the most expensive stories that 60 Minutes ever did. And so he was shooting the story, and they bring it back, they edit it together, and they show it to Don Hewitt, the creator of 60 Minutes. And Don says, the monks walk to the left, the monks walk to the right, then the monks walk to the left again. What kind of effing story is that? And needless to say, it never made air because, but it was extraordinarily expensive. But it was it gave you a sense of what the laissez-faire kind of attitude was at 60 at the time. We would do stories about the Orient Express. Morley would do this extraordinary story where he traveled on the last train ride. And Harry Reasoner did the most expensive meal you could buy on planet Earth. And that was and in a time when we're going now through pandemics, the divisiveness of the last election, I kind of miss some of those stories where you just could sit back and take a breath and just be entertained at the genius of the writing. I mean, Harry did a story about the end of Casablanca, for example, where they found the movie set of Casablanca, and they were selling it off as spare parts. And he said that everybody remembers who they saw the movie with. And if she's looking in now, here's looking at you, kid. That was just brilliant writing, and just, and just as a fan of the show, as much as a participant of the show, I really miss it.
Okay. And we have one more question from Kalina Gregory. It's just a joke, actually. You're going to have a bad day when you wake up and see Dan Rather walking up your driveway. Yeah,
it's actually you're going to have a bad day when you see Mike Wallace walking up your driveway. Today, I don't think you'd have a bad day if you see Dan Rather walking, because he's probably doing an interview with an aging rock star. But just what he's doing these shows, which are great. I love them on Access. But that was sort of the way people regarded it. But it's true.
But everybody watched.
Everyone watched.
You tell us a story about Dan Rather after he had his debacle with the story about George W. Bush and so on. So he's not working anymore, and he's in the office, and he's got he's walking by, and he asked one of the secretaries, "What's the soup of the day?" Yeah,
and he had enough self-awareness to realize, here I was, the great anchor of CBS Evening News. Now I'm asking what the soup of the day was. Yeah. And it's kind of and one of the things in my book that I point out is the end of days for Mike Wallace,
right?
Which a lot of people have talked to me about. And it's amazing that with this extraordinary career that Mike had, at the end of days, he didn't have a memory of having worked on the show.
Yeah. You tell such personal and moving details about him, both the stuff that's irritating and the stuff that obviously made it worthwhile for you to work with him for so many years. The difficult stuff, I mean, his relationship with his son, Chris Wallace, is unbelievable. And we won't talk about that, but their details are in the book. But you also, as a big overarching theme that you had in the book for a lot of the people, is, do you know when to quit? Do you know when to retire? And the same is something that people discuss, like about, they say Tom Brady or, top sports stars who have to quit much earlier if they're going to go out at the right peak. But I think you should talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an interesting thing for everybody to try to decide in whatever their situation is, because the decision isn't just financial. The decision is something much more than that. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, these people had more money than they'll ever spend in their lifetimes. And what they inevitably did was they stayed on stage too long. And Morley Safer, in his last conversations, would tell his people, spend more time with your family, leave the scene. Morley would end up retiring, I think, within a week or a month of the time, would end up dying within a week or a month of the time that he retired.
Right.
Andy Rooney was sort of the same way. Ed Bradley, died of cancer, where in the last stories that he did, he could barely voice over the stories that he was doing. And you realize that people stay on the stage a little bit too long. When I was, I know we're running out of time, but the last thing I just want to say, when I was started, I was covering the New Age movement. And one of the people I had great admiration for was somebody named Pir Vilayat Khan, who was the head of the Sufis at the time. And he said to me, he gave me darshan, and he said, change your career every 7 years. That way you become the ruler of your career, and the career doesn't become the ruler of you. And needless to say, I disregarded that spiritual directive.
Right.
But I think you still have a chance if you could kind of, if you want to have your full career and you want to leave, just leave. In my case, I left, if you will, when I felt I was at the top of my game. I had just won a Peabody, a DuPont, an Emmy, and a million other things for the Opiate series. And it was a perfect time to move on and to do different things and try different things out. And it's something that I didn't see a lot of the people I work with do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very clear that you watched and you learned. And I was actually going to go back to your New Age journal, because I thought that was a very interesting. That's the first thing you sort of did after Cornell, and how, what was it that you had done that made you go to work for as a writer first for the New Age journal, for something? Obviously, people from the late '60s and early '70s think, well, everybody did that, or not everybody, but lots of people did that. But it's still unusual choice.
I was very, I was into Kundalini yoga. I'd been in an ashram for a period of time. I was vegetarian. I got to know Yogi Bhajan, and who was running the movement at the time. That was the direction that I was pursuing at that point in time. And it was part of the journey of self-discovery. And so that got me into that. And, I did that for a short period of time.
They must have been very happy with the higher level of writing ability that they got from you, from the average of those journals. When they said the topics are very interesting, but they don't really get the top writers that often. Right. Although at the time there was really that was a really big push time in the early '70s for alternative attitudes towards what's going on in life. Yeah. Maybe we finish up with one last thing. You did a Larry Flynt interview, and he gave you the three things that everybody wants to hear about all the time: JFK, UFOs, and drugs. And I thought it was such a weird conclusion, but I've run into other people who are in the magazine industry who have also just have the way that life works is very, very simple. You just take people's normal desires, daily desires, and dress them up every month in a slightly different dress and keep hitting the same things over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, the context of it was I was, again, bouncing around, struggling, trying to develop some freelance work. And Flynt, during a short period of time, was going legit. And he created a magazine called Ohio Magazine, where he was hiring, legitimate newspaper people, legitimate people. And he wanted me to be the Washington bureau chief of it. Mm-hmm. So, I was out of work, and he's paying me more than I ever thought I'd make. I think it was $20,000. And he said, I got a story for you to investigate. I said, what's that? They're making human beings in Massachusetts without belly buttons and without souls. And I said, who? And he said, the CIA. And I looked at him and I said, okay, I'll get right on it. It was yeah, it was a strange, I write about a lot of that in the book. Well, listen, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, but I want to finish with something more substantive. That is Vereshchuk's Innocence Project.
Yes.
You did something on that. I had an associate that worked for me that's what he did his pro bono work for. So I'm familiar with the project. But why don't you, because this really saves people's lives.
No, you know,
and you did a 60 Minutes thing on it, and I think that's another.
I've known Barry a very, very long time, and you know, he really has done such extraordinary, noble work, and you know, he's both a friend. And I'm a huge fan of his. And over the decades, when I was at ABC, I did one of the first DNA stories with Barry. And then we've done other stories. I mean, there's nothing more noble you can do as a journalist than to get somebody who's wrongfully convicted out of jail. And I think, you know, that's certainly the work we've done over the years. We did it, and Barry and I did it. Actually, on one story, I worked with his partner, Peter Neufeld, and on Innocence in Chicago, where these kids were wrongfully convicted in Chicago. And then I did something on 30 Years on Death Row, where somebody was railroaded by a prosecutor who went on camera with us to talk about how he railroaded. To this day, it's Bill Whitaker's and mine favorite story that we ever did. And you know, I just tell you got to read it. It's really
you got to read it.
I write about a lot of it in there.
It's very moving, and unfortunately, it's an unending job. So next generation, take it over. Keep working on this, because in spite of the fact that it's not very many people who do those kind of things, there's always some pressures, like you said at the beginning, about the fear of failure, the fear, you know, am I going to become unimportant? That kind of thing that makes people want to close a case and then not play by the rules. And then somebody totally innocent sits in jail for 30 years. And oftentimes it's a powerless person to begin with.
That's exactly right.
And it really is a shame that we keep doing that. But, you know, we keep getting better at it. And everybody should just keep it in mind who likes to work on that kind of thing, and get it back out there, because that's one of the things that we can all work on and make things a little bit better.
Completely agree.
Bringing out all that information has been very useful. Very fun book. Thanks so much, Ira, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And so ends another event of the Commonwealth Club in its 119th year of enlightened discussion. Thanks again, Ira, for coming and joining us. And thank you for joining us, the audience. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.